My name is Sarah Jensen. I'm 39 years old. My husband thought he was outsmarting me by secretly planning our divorce. He was so wrong. What he didn't know was that the moment he decided I was just a pawn in his little game, I'd already started my own. And in my game, make the rules. Now, this isn't a story about screaming matches or throwing plates. This is about quiet strength, the power of being underestimated, and how I let my husband build his own cage key by key while I calmly planned my escape. It all started on a Tuesday, a completely ordinary, painfully normal Tuesday. The kids were at school, the house was finally quiet, and I was sitting down to do our bi weekly budget on the family computer. My husband of 15 years, Mark, was a man of meticulous habits. He was an executive at some fast growing tech firm, and our whole life was organized into neat folders and color coded spreadsheets. He handled the big finances, the investments, the long term planning. I handled the home, the kids, the social calendar that propped up his career, the million unseen tasks that actually make a family run. He used to call me the CEO of the home. I thought it was sweet at first. It wasn't until later that I realized it was just his way of putting my life's work in a tidy, non threatening box. Anyway, that day, as I clicked through the usual folders, household, vacations, taxes, my mouse slipped. It hovered over a new folder I'd never seen before, tucked away in some obscure corner of the hard drive. It was named Project Phoenix. My heart didn't drop, it just stopped. It was that cold, sudden stillness you feel right before a car crash. Phoenix, a mythical bird that rises from the ashes, a new life. My blood ran cold. The folder was password protected, of course. I tried our anniversary. Nope. The kids' birthdays. Nothing. Then a memory surfaced, a detail so small he must have thought I'd forgotten it ages ago. The closing date of his first big solo business deal, the one that launched his career, the one I'd stayed up 3 nights in a row preparing the presentation slides for a lifetime ago before I shelved my own career for his. I typed it in, the folder opened, and just like that, the world I knew was gone. To anyone on the outside, we were the perfect couple. We had the beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 bright, happy kids, the annual ski trips, the whole 9 yards. 15 years of marriage looked seamless from a distance. Mark was the ambitious provider, the star, the guy who made all the important decisions. I was the supportive wife, the devoted mother, the one who made sure his home life was a frictionless sanctuary so he could focus on climbing the ladder. I have a degree in marketing, and I had a promising career that I put on pause to raise our children. We called it a joint decision, a temporary pause, but temporary somehow turned into 15 years, and the pause became a full stop. I was never resentful. I thought we were a team. But looking back, the signs were all there. The way he'd explain finances to me in that patronizing, simple tone, as if I were a toddler. The way he'd pat my hand and say, "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." Whenever I asked about his portfolio, he wasn't overtly cruel. He was worse. He was condescendingly kind. He had built this whole narrative where he was the genius architect of our lives, and I was just the beautiful, slightly clueless occupant of the house he'd built. He saw me as part of the scenery, a comfortable piece of furniture. He had no idea the furniture was listening, and he sure as hell had no idea the furniture was about to get up and walk away. He forgot that before I was his wife, I was my own person. And that was his first and most critical mistake. Project Phoenix was a masterclass in calculated betrayal. This wasn't some messy, emotional decision. This was a business plan. There were spreadsheets detailing our assets with suspiciously low valuations on his company stocks and our art collection. There was a document titled Timeline with dates for him to find a new apartment, transfer funds, and finally have the conversation with me. He had it scheduled for the week after his annual bonus was due, a bonus he was clearly planning to defer until after the divorce was final to keep it all for himself. But the most chilling part was a subfolder named Settlement Strategy. Inside was a document outlining his lowball offer, a fraction of what I was entitled to, which he was going to frame as a generous gift to help me get back on my feet. It was based on a version of his income he'd been underreporting for months. There were even notes from a consultation with a shark of a divorce attorney. The notes were clinical. Wife has been out of the workforce for 15 years. One line read, no independent income, limited financial literacy will likely be emotional and overwhelmed. A quick, firm offer should secure a favorable outcome. He had already decided who I was, an emotional liability to be managed, not a partner of 15 years to be respected. I scrolled through file after file, a digital autopsy of my marriage. He even had a plan to create a fake debt to a relative, a loan he'd repay from our funds before the divorce, only to have the money funneled back to him later. The sheer precision of it was suffocating. He hadn't just fallen out of love. He had been actively plotting my financial ruin, banking on my ignorance. I was just collateral damage in the launch of his shiny new life. As I sat there in the silent house, the shock started to fade, and something else took its place, a cold, hard resolve I'd never felt before. It felt like a switch being flipped in my soul. He thought this was his game. He thought he'd already won, and in that moment, I decided to let him keep thinking that. My first instinct, print everything, march into his study and throw it all in his face. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to watch him squirm, but his own words echoed in my head. Will likely be emotional and overwhelmed. They were expecting a storm. They were prepared for it. An outburst would just prove his point that I was irrational and that could actually hurt me when things got real. So I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I closed the folder, I wiped the computer's history clean, and I went downstairs to start making his favorite dinner. The war had been declared, but only one of us knew it. My battlefield would be silence, and my weapon would be the very ignorance he was counting on. The next morning, I called an old college friend and got the name of the best family law attorney in the state. Not a shark, but a master strategist, a woman famous for working with forensic accountants. I took a secret meeting, paying the consultation fee in cash I'd been skimming from the grocery budget for weeks. I laid out everything. She didn't focus on the betrayal, she focused on the strategy. Her first piece of advice was gold: do nothing. Let him think he's in control. The more confident he gets, the sloppier he'll be. And so my double life began. By day, I was super wife. I hosted dinner parties, smiling and laughing while my mind was cataloging every boast he made about his company's latest triumphs. I'd listen patiently to his work complaints, making mental notes of projects that probably meant future bonuses. By night, after he and the kids were asleep, I became a financial detective. With secret guidance from my lawyer, I learned how spouses hide assets. I started looking for the clues he was too arrogant to hide: small, unexplained wire transfers, credit card statements I'd never heard of, overpayments to the IRS that would come back to him as a refund later. He was so convinced I was clueless that he left a trail of breadcrumbs all over his unlocked home office. The emotional toll was immense, smiling at the man whose betrayal felt like a physical presence in our house. Some nights I'd just lock myself in the bathroom and cry silently, the grief and rage a knot in my chest. I started journaling, filling pages with all the anger I couldn't show. I also started running every morning before anyone woke up, pounding the pavement until the fire in my lungs burned hotter than the fire in my heart. This wasn't just for my sanity, it was about discipline. I was training for the fight of my life. On my lawyer's advice, I quietly opened a bank account in my own name. I documented every single contribution I had made to our family that didn't come with a W 2, the career I'd given up, the fundraisers I'd chaired, the professional contacts I'd nurtured for him. I was building a case, not just for a settlement, but for the value of my life's work. He thought my work was worthless. I was about to teach him a very, very expensive lesson. He chose a Sunday evening for the conversation, 3 months after I found Project Phoenix, right on schedule. He asked the kids to go to their rooms, then sat me down on the living room sofa. He had this practiced, somber look on his face, but I could see the flicker of excitement in his eyes. For him, the finish line was in sight. He launched into his rehearsed speech. He wasn't happy, hadn't been for a long time, we'd grown apart. It wasn't my fault, he said. It was his. He used that gentle, patronizing tone, like he was letting a fragile employee go. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, and I listened. I didn't cry, I didn't interrupt. I let him say every last word. My calmness seemed to unnerve him, but he pressed on. Then came his big moment. I've been thinking a lot about what's fair, and I want to make sure you're taken care of, he said, sliding a single piece of paper across the coffee table. It was his offer, the exact insulting number from the spreadsheet I'd seen 3 months before. I think this is very generous, he said, leaning back so confident. It should be more than enough for you to find a little place and get back on your feet. He waited for the tears, the shock, the begging. He was prepared for the emotional woman his lawyer described. He was not prepared for me. I glanced at the paper, then back at him. I took a slow, deliberate breath. No, I said, my voice perfectly level. That's not going to work for me. His smile faltered. What do you mean? This is more than fair. You won't get a better offer. I know, I said, because this isn't a negotiation based on reality. I reached beside the sofa cushion and pulled out a thick, professionally bound folder of my own. I placed it on the table next to his flimsy sheet of paper. It landed with a solid, satisfying thud. His eyes darted to the folder. The label was simple. Marital Asset Analysis, Mark and Sarah Jensen. His face went white. What is this? He whispered. That, I said, opening it for him, is a preliminary report from the forensic accountant I hired 8 weeks ago. It details the 3 undeclared accounts you have in the Cayman Islands. It includes a proper valuation of your stock options, which you've undervalued by about 40%. It also has copies of credit card statements for an account you've been using to fund a lifestyle I wasn't part of. And finally, it includes a legal opinion on the penalties for fraudulent disclosure. I paused, letting it all sink in. My attorney will be contacting yours tomorrow morning to discuss a division of assets based on these numbers, the real numbers. I just watched his face. The confident man from 5 minutes ago completely vanished. In his place was a stranger, his face a mask of pure shock. The architect of Project Phoenix had just realized his entire foundation was built on sand. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in 15 years, Mark was speechless. The aftermath wasn't some dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, systematic dismantling of his entire world. The power dynamic didn't just shift, it completely inverted. From the moment my folder hit that table, he was never in control again. His attempts to bluster and threaten in the following days were useless. He'd yell, and I'd just calmly say, "Please direct all communication to my lawyer." His anger had no purchase on me anymore. He was playing a game of emotional chess, and I had simply knocked over the board. His brilliant Project Phoenix became his undoing. In divorce court, trying to hide assets isn't just frowned upon, it's a legal disaster. My evidence of his intent to deceive put him on the permanent defensive. His shark of a lawyer quickly realized they were in an unwinnable position. The negotiation was no longer about his generous offer. It was about how much it would cost him to avoid a messy, embarrassing court battle that would expose everything. The story he had planned to tell our friends, the sad, amicable split, crumbled. The truth painted a very different picture, one of a liar and a cheat. The sympathy he was counting on never showed up. In the end, he was isolated by his own scheme. He was forced to settle, and the final agreement gave me and our children the security he had tried so hard to steal. It included the full value of his hidden accounts, the accurate worth of his stocks, and a significant chunk of his bonus. The house he was so sure he'd keep was sold, and the proceeds were divided equitably. He lost far, far more than if he had just been honest from the start. His grand plan to rise like a phoenix left him completely burned. It's been a year now. I live in a new house that I chose and paid for myself. It's smaller, but it's brighter, and it's all mine. The settlement gave me a foundation, but I decided I would never again be dependent on anyone. I used some of it to go back and finish my marketing degree, and I've recently started my own small consulting business from a sunny little home office. My real victory wasn't watching his face fall or the number on the final check. Those were just consequences. The true victory was quieter. It was in the moment I chose not to scream, the moment I decided to fight for myself with my head instead of my heart. It was the realization that the woman he thought was too simple to understand his finances was the one who unraveled his entire deception. He never saw me as an equal partner, and in the end, he was right. I wasn't his equal, I was his superior. I learned that true strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the most prepared. It's about knowing your own worth, especially when someone is trying to convince you you're worthless. This journey wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation. I reclaimed my dignity, my independence, and my future. The real Phoenix wasn't him, it was me. I rose from the ashes of a life built on a lie, not into a new life, but back into my own. A life where I am the architect, I make the rules, and I will never, ever be underestimated again. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to find your own strength when you've been knocked down, I'd be honored if you liked this video and subscribed for more stories of empowerment. True strength often comes from the quietest places. Share your own stories of quiet victory in the comments below. I would love to read them. In the end, letting him think he won was the most powerful move I ever made. His arrogance was the key that unlocked his own cage. The greatest victory isn't in tearing someone else down, but in lifting yourself up with a quiet confidence they never see coming. It's about knowing your own value so completely that no one else's opinion can ever diminish it. Thank you for listening.